Hey everybody, welcome to another Stuff Sketch with Gregg Schigiel. I'm Gregg Schigiel. What you're seeing right now is a very quick recap of the last video, part one of this series of me doing an illustration of Batman and the Outsiders. If you want to see these pencils happen in slightly less frantic a fashion, watch part one. But now, part two. This is going to be inking and coloring, so straight away I'm inking Metamorpho. What I thought I'd talk about during this video is some of the folks who created material that's in Batman the Outsiders. So, as I'm inking Metamorpho, I'll talk a little bit about Ramona Fradon, who was the co-creator of Metamorpho, the artist behind Metamorpho, designed Metamorpho. Also worked on Aquaman in the 1960s, worked on Super Friends comics in the 70s, and I was lucky enough to work with Ramona on SpongeBob comics. When that was running, I worked on stories where I did the SpongeBob parts and she did Mermaid Man parts. And in general, I just had opportunities to appear in comics with Ramona Fradon, who, as far as I'm concerned, and I believe according to the Eisner Awards, is a legit comics legend, which is awesome. Also awesome was the fact that through working with her SpongeBob comics and having the opportunity to meet her a couple of times, she was very kind and generous to read the second Pix graphic novel and offer a blurb for the back cover, which was, I mean, all things considered, I don't know, it was very awesome. I'm a fan of her work. She, in the times I've met and talked to her, has never not been kind of amazing. You know, she is now in her 90s, but in any instance I've met her, in her late 80s or early 90s, she's been sharp and funny and very on point. Last time I saw her was at Baltimore Comic-Con in 2017, and just, you know, she had a very comfortable chair that she was sitting in, and I was talking to her along with somebody else, and the person I was with remarked on how smart it was that she brought her own chair, and she very quickly pointed out that that wasn't her choice. The convention makes her sit in that chair, that she would sit in whatever chair was there. She carried her own bags. Again, I think she was 91 at the time. Still working. She's still drawing now. She's no joke. Ramona Fradon. Do yourself a favor. Read those old Metamorpho comics. Read her old Aquaman comics. Go find those SpongeBob comics that we worked on. Treat yourself to that. Batman the Outsiders was created by, despite the characters being created by different people. So, Black Lightning was created by Tony Isabella with, I think, Trevor Von Eden. I could be getting that wrong, but I think that's accurate. And I think the phrasing of that is accurate. I don't know. That character has a complicated tale behind him. But the team itself was created by Mike Barr and Jim Aparo. Jim Aparo is a legendary Batman artist. Was drawing Batman. I don't even know when he started drawing Batman. I think the 70s, but certainly drew him well into the 90s, if memory serves. Again, legendary Batman artist, classic look to Batman. Drew Death in the Family, the story where Jason Todd, the second Robin, dies. Very classic looking Batman stuff. And Mike Barr was one of those, is a situation where I didn't realize how much I liked Mike Barr stuff until I realized how much I liked Mike Barr stuff. So I had read, I think I mentioned this in the last video, there was a point where I was buying Batman comics, and I would specifically look for detective comics with the names Barr, Davis, and Neary on them. Turns out that was Mike Barr. He also wrote a story called Camelot 3000, which I read in, I think I was 13 when I read it, and it just blew my mind. In general, he writes probably one of my favorite versions of Batman. It's a Batman that is, dark detective, blah, 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 but he's also a superhero. He smiles from time to time, cracks a joke. It's pretty terrific. And I got the chance to meet Mike Barr, I think it's 2 years ago, at a convention in Connecticut. And it's fun because as I was talking to him, I happened to be working on a drawing of Batman, a commission of Batman. But in the excitement, I forgot to mention Camelot 3000. So, Mike, if you're watching this, and I know you're not, Camelot 3000 was awesome. And then, of course, Alan Davis who I mentioned a little bit, I think, in the last video. I should have watched the last video to remind myself what I talked about. But Alan Davis took over the artwork on Batman the Outsiders after Jim Aparo. And as far as I know, it was his first work at DC. He had been doing stuff over in England. Alan Davis was the first comic artist whose name I pieced together. I'm sure I've told this story, if not here, on my podcast, but I was reading Batman comics, and then I was reading a comic called Excalibur, and I noticed similarities in terms of what Brian Braddock, which is Captain Britain's secret identity, and Bruce Wayne, Batman's secret identity, they looked very similar, and I was able to piece together that the Davis on the cover of those detective comics that I liked so much was the same Alan Davis that was drawing Excalibur, and very quickly he became my favorite, to the point where I learned how to draw girls and women by looking at his drawings and breaking down the component parts and figuring it out. And I was very lucky to meet and, I don't know, work is not the word for it, but I did a panel at Heroes Con in Charlotte in 2017 or 18. I can't remember. I should have looked that up too, but he was on a panel I did called Comics Aren't Real, and it was very difficult to not just it was a group panel. So Alan was one of 5 guests I had, maybe 6. Either way, I know that it was work for me not to just make the entire thing me asking Alan Davis questions. I did get to ask him a handful of questions, which was great, and he was a perfectly lovely, pleasant fellow. He's so good. Oh my goodness. So now I'm coloring, and normally if I was doing this coloring work for print rather than a video for a fun drawing, I would have switched over to Photoshop. This is happening in Clip Studio Paint. I would have switched to Photoshop. I like to color in CMYK if I can help it. CMYK are the ink colors for printing, as opposed to RGB, which are the colors for screen and light. CMYK, I learned comics coloring in CMYK when I was at Marvel, so that is, and I have a sense of how it works, how it will relate to the page. So that's usually how I think in terms of color, especially coloring comics. So on the screen on the bottom left are some color sliders for each of those 4 colors: C, M, Y, and K. C it's a cyan, magenta, yellow, and K is black. And a combination of those different colors gets you different printing colors. What you're seeing right now is me making an adjustment because I screwed up in the inking, and I drew geo-force's force blast going through Halo's halo. So I'm correcting that because I was overzealous in my inking and got it wrong. But anyway, I would be coloring this in Photoshop for those circumstances, but since this isn't for print, I guess I could convert it to CMYK, but the colors would, I don't know. Anyway, I'm doing this in Clip Studio Paint just for the efficiency of not switching out different software and make the video just a smoother, cleaner transition. Funny thing about the Halo drawing, so that's the blonde character there. So I started doing this drawing as I was reading Batman Outsiders comics, old Batman comics from the 80s, and the issue I read after I did this drawing, Halo cuts her hair into a shorter, sort of, I don't know, I don't even know what I'd call the hairdo. Like an Olivia Newton-John, Let's Get Physical haircut, maybe, like a very 80s haircut that I'm not doing justice to in my description. But so there you go. If you are a Batman Outsiders fan and you're wondering why Halo has her long hair and why the character Looker is not here, I had not read those issues yet. Since this drawing was done, I've read the issues where, again, Halo gets her haircut and Looker gets introduced, and yeah. And I have one more issue left before Batman Outsiders the series ends. It's issue 32. I have not read it yet, but I will. With Black Lightning, I've seen different interpretations of his lightning. Sometimes it's yellow, sometimes it's not. I decided to make the lightning black. He goes by Black Lightning. I think the Black Lightning looks cool, so that's what I went with. And for Batman, I keep him, particularly for this era of Batman. It's the colors I love for Batman, which is a nice blue, a nice gray, and clean yellow. Superhero. I call that superhero Batman. And now I'm dropping in the last bit of color on geo-force. Now this whole phase has me just been putting in just the laying out the color, flat color on all these characters. Once geo-force is all filled in, I'm going to go in and start adding shadows and highlights, although they're more shadows, to give things a little more form and depth. Make it look sharp. This drawing was a ton of fun to do, I must say. Don't be surprised if future drawings on this series continue in this sort of cartoony mode. They're just fun to draw this way. But you let me know. You can comment below and let me know what kind of things you've enjoyed seeing, what you want to see more of, what you want to see less of. I have some other process videos in the stable waiting to go. So another question for you is, do you like the two-parter? Do you want to see everything in one shot but really sped up super fast? I try and keep the videos to 15 minutes or less for all kinds of reasons. Not the least of which is, maybe you don't want to hear me yammering for more than 15 minutes, if at all. Maybe you're muting this and not hearing a single word I'm saying. I don't know. I'm not there watching this with you. So interesting thing about this geo-force drawing, on his right bicep, his left bicep, the one that I just colored in, I'm a little bothered that I didn't do a black line to separate where the bicep was, but then I went in with that green line to create that form, and I'm happy with it. To get a little insight into the lunacy of my brain and what was happening while I was doing this stuff. Now I'm just caught up in watching my own coloring, which might make for a less exciting narration on this video. Apologies. Now if you're asking, how do I decide where the shadows go and the shapes and all that, I don't know that I could explain it in the next 40 seconds. A lot of it comes from practice, a lot of it comes from getting a sense of the shapes and forms that I've laid down, trying to continue to create that without getting in the way of the line work. I think about light sources a little bit, not as much as I think most people do. Basically, does it look cool? So it's just about done, about to zoom out. So that's about all the stuff I have left to say. See you next time.